Thank you for joining us. We'll begin momentarily. We're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. Thanks. Thank you for joining us. We'll be starting momentarily. We're just going to give everyone a minute to log in. Thanks. Hello, and welcome to the webinar. Welcome to Miro Consulting's webinar on IBM Open Question and Answers. My name is Sean Donahue, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Miro Consulting. Joining me today is Sharon Trembley, IBM Practice Senior Analyst here at Miro.
Hello.
If you have any questions during the broadcast, please use your webinar control panel. There's a question section, and we will try to get to it before the end of the broadcast today. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly explain who Miro is. We specialize in software audit defense, cloud migrations, contract negotiation, license optimization, and license management for Oracle, Microsoft, and of course, IBM. Since 2000, Miro has helped hundreds of clients worldwide to optimize their total cost of ownership and has overseen 1.5 billion in licensing transactions. Please note all your questions today will be kept confidential. They'll only be visible to us, the presenters, and they will not be shared with any third parties, including IBM. All right, so without further ado, let's get started with the presentation. Sharon, please take it away.
Sure. Our first question, why would the revised IBM Passport Advantage Agreement apply to me? I bought my licenses under the old agreement. IBM recently updated it. So I did a blog post on it earlier, but I think the submitted question is good for a number of reasons, which maybe the submitter wouldn't agree with, but there's a lot of possible intentions and outcomes just from this question. If I missed your intent, you can rephrase it in the text box and submit it. IBM sent out a letter to their current Passport Advantage customers dated November 1st, 2017, that the revision would take effect on February 1st this year. Previous versions have stated IBM can change the agreement with 3 months written notice. If you didn't get the letter, check with who is designated as your Passport Advantage administrator. You should keep that contact information up to date with IBM. That's part of your client responsibilities within the agreement, but not keeping that up to date is sort of like setting yourself up for failure because you won't get the notifications that you would expect. And, back to the question, lastly, why wouldn't you agree to the changes? Because, maybe you don't like IBM and we'll fight about anything, but what has changed that could impact you? If none of the changes are a problem, it kind of sets up an antagonistic viewpoint or tone with IBM. There were really no major changes. They added some language about how IBM was already doing things like hiring an auditor, an outside auditor firm for their audits. Other changes like adding the EU language for data protection, and they changed the term SaaS to cloud services, so none of them are, have any impact. The one new thing that might actually be helpful to you is you can terminate a fixed term or monthly license earlier with notification and receive a prorated refund. I'm not sure how nice that's going to turn out to be because I used to do hardware leasing when I was with IBM, and I think I need to see some terminations first to get a feel for how it works and the pricing. Everything else, though, is pretty much the same. There's more details about using ILMT and subcapacity, but the intent's the same unless you meet, and like before, unless you meet the terms for subcapacity licensing, you calculate your licenses by full capacity. And since I got this question in advance, I made some slides to cover that last point because that seems to be the biggest misunderstanding with IBM licensing around subcapacity licensing, even with IBM spelling out the conditions in both the current and previous versions of their agreement. So, yeah, in both versions, all IBM customers are full capacity by default. And that's going to be your PVU licenses, which are server-based, your RVU licenses, where the resource is defined as your managed cores, and now and then we'll see something that's licensed by sockets. So what does it mean? Full capacity. If you do nothing, your licensing calculations are going to remain at full capacity as they've always been since the PVU metric came out about 10 years ago. And subcapacity licensing will not apply unless a customer adheres to the terms that are in the agreement. You have to install IBM's license metric tool, ILMT, or get a written exception for an alternative method of tracking your deployment. The agents should be on all servers running IBM software. You have to configure it, and you're going to be generating quarterly reports, and they have to be accurate, and you keep them on file. And the inability to install ILMT kind of defaults back to full capacity for the servers without it. So if you can install it partially, that's better than nothing. The terms in the Passport Advantage Agreement are in sections 1.13 and 1.14, programs in a virtualization environment and clients reporting responsibilities. When you're missing agents, those servers will be full capacity. And because I do a lot of audit defense, I hear some of the excuses, but it's if it's too hard, too time consuming, you need a resource to manage it, you have a firewall, it has to communicate with IBM at least to get the license definitions when it updates its library. So if you don't want to agree to those terms, you could still be full capacity. And lately there was a question about eligible technologies. IBM maintains a list of eligible technologies. So if there's a link within the Passport Advantage Agreement, and I think on the subcapacity web pages, that'll lead you to their latest revision of the eligible technologies that ILMT can work on. And when something's been recently added, you supposedly have 90 days to get it up and running, but things aren't being added that frequently, and it's unlikely you have a cutting-edge technology that's not ILMT eligible. So, don't panic. Update it as soon as you can. And IBM does keep updating the list and getting more things working with ILMT. I picked this section of their eligibility list just because there was lately something about ZVM that people were thinking that maybe it's not didn't need ILMT. And what ZVM is, it's a one form of virtualization, but it's IBM's for Z series and those Linux One servers. And I really don't see it that much because a lot of my clients use either P series or x86 blade servers. But it's been on the ILMT eligible technology list for years, so I'm not sure where the rumor started that ILMT wouldn't work on ZVM. And for any technology, as soon as it's eligible for subcapacity, you can install ILMT. This list is maintained by IBM to list it what it can be run on, and it doesn't replace. If you don't see it here, that doesn't mean you're home free. It doesn't replace the licensing terms in the Passport Advantage Agreement. If your technology is not listed, don't worry, you can still get subcapacity. But in the Passport Advantage Agreement, it lists what you have to do. You can't run ILMT. You prepare a quarterly manual report. Just a spreadsheet. It's not, terrible. It could be time consuming if you have an ineligible technology installed in a lot of places. But IBM gives you a template of the spreadsheet for the manual report, so you know exactly what information they want. You're going to know, like we see in ILMT, the physical hardware, the virtualization, and most of the time where I see manual reporting is with the companies that have the tiny environments or less than 1,000 employees, because they do have the exception written right into the Passport Advantage Agreement. instead of being required to install ILMT for subcapacity, they have the option to prepare manual reports every 3 months. And that means, they have to record it accurately at that time. Somebody that's responsible signs off that it's accurate and kind of timestamps it, so we know we have a quarterly report, not when they get an audit letter. And where someone could get into trouble with this is if they have less than 1,000 employees, then they suddenly have a merger or acquisition, and now they have more than 1,000 employees. That's when they have to start running ILMT, and that's probably not top of mind when you're doing a merger or acquisition. But I have heard during an audit, the auditor will say, okay, you didn't install ILMT within 90 days of exceeding 1,000 employees, so you have your manual reports. And then if your answer is no, or what reports, you're still full capacity because you didn't comply with the terms. That's the simplicity of it is you don't comply with the terms, you're full capacity. And I did one more slide on this because some people don't understand the difference between sub and full capacity, because full capacity sounds so much easier, but when you look at the licenses, you're like, whoa. So if we with full capacity, it seems like the easy thing to do, but if you use virtualization like VMware, IBM's LPARS, that's EVM, and such, you could license with subcapacity only the virtual cores allocated rather than the entire physical server, which is the full capacity method. I worked up a example with 3 physical hosts, and if you cluster them together, because you see that a lot with VMware, you cluster them together, to allow the 6 virtual machines the ability to move between those 3 hosts. And let's say we have a couple IBM products installed on them, DB2, some WAS, some MQ. With ILMT and subcapacity, we'd only need to license PVUs for the virtual cores allocated. For none of these titles, the way I worked up the example, we're not using a full 12 cores for any of those products. So subcapacity licensing only requires licensing the allocated virtual cores. So in that green column there, with subcapacity, you only need to license for 1 core of DB2, 7 cores of MQ, and 5 cores of WAS, because those is what was been allocated, the processing power allocated to them. And if ILMT was not in use and you went with full capacity, you're going to have to license the PVUs to cover all 3 titles for all 12 cores of processing, which is 12 cores of each, even though DB2 is only running on 1 allocated core. So in an audit situation, there's a little extra that you can do to appeal to IBM and their auditors, but you get the basic idea of, the difference between the virtualization and full capacity not being a good mix that would lead to a big licensing problem. And not having the time to read the Passport Advantage Agreement or the notifications, ignorance is not going to be acceptable to IBM. And if that's truly the case, and you say, well, I never read it, I never got the emails, then you would have been full capacity like you were 10 years ago. You got a hint somewhere along the line that you only want to license the allocated cores. So you can't just cherry pick a rule out and say, that's me. Okay, our next question is, what if I install ILMT and the tool finds IBM software I didn't know about? And that, I think is another good question, because some people might panic, but you have to just work with what you're given. So we're going to assume here that ILMT's output's been compared against what's on the server, because ILMT has some steps in setting it up that might go awry, and it may misinterpret products if the settings aren't correct. So let's say you ruled that out. So if you find something unexpected, let's think about the possible reasons. Is it an IBM software name change? Names changes a lot with IBM. Not daily, but like the Tivoli family is being rebranded as Spectrum. So if you see Tivoli and it's reporting Spectrum, if you can put that together, you're like, okay, I'm good. Or a bigger concern would be, is the software left over that was not the installed property? Is it a leftover instance? Is it a proof of concept? Is it a partial directory remaining? So within the ILMT report, there'll be the directory path of where it found it, so that'll give you a hint of where to start looking. So what can you do about this? Okay, first, are you using the software? That's, if it's in use, you should acquire the licenses. If you're using it, that's, part of, the agreement that you're going to be buying sufficient licenses before you're deploying IBM software. If you find it after the fact, you should still buy the licenses if you're using it. If you're not using it, deinstall it and review your internal processes to make sure this, that isn't happening frequently. You don't want it to happen again. And if you made use of IBM software prior to that deinstall, besides a proof of concept, you probably should have bought the licenses to cover the use. I mean, that's the fair thing to do if you got use out of it. Okay. This was actually for my last webinar, but we didn't notice it because it wasn't in the form of a question like Jeopardy. So he made the comment, this passport agreement doesn't apply to me because I have an ELA. So I thought that was actually a good comment if I had been looking at the right place. Having an ELA with IBM is better because you could have a range of, they have all kinds of perks they could put in their ELA regarding their software. And although you might think it adds complexity and you may feel it's locking you into certain licenses for a fixed period of time, IBM's flexible. Don't poo-poo an ELA because you have a preconceived notion that it's not for you. You may remember that the software is downloaded through Passport Advantage System 2, so it's more like a document with this name rather than saying the agreement doesn't apply to me. So there's probably a checkbox when you're downloading too. So if you've downloaded, you'll be using the software in accordance with the agreement. But also, I did take this out of an ELA. I see this all the time, like in the first page, that says that there'll be associated agreements. It'll be, if you're renewing every 3 years, you'll get, your preceding agreements are included too, but you'll also have a list of other documents that are part of your ELA, even though, they didn't print them out and stick them in the bundle with you. So usually, I always see the Passport Advantage agreement. And if there's an order of precedent when they conflict, that's a great follow-up since we're still on the topic. An example I can think of where they might contradict is if your ELA has a feature where you're allowed to deploy software and then you report to IBM what you deployed in order to get more licenses. That kind of supersedes the usual Passport Advantage term that you must buy enough licenses prior to deploying. So in a case like this, your ELA terms take precedent or give you the exception to that Passport Advantage term. And but you have to remember, you can't say that something isn't spelled out in your ELA and doesn't apply because it's only mentioned in the Passport Advantage agreement, such as subcapacity licenses. It might not say in your ELA, use the ILMT, but you could have an exception in your ELA that would supersede it. Like, let's say you want to use Flexera for your software asset management. That's likely to get an exception because it's reporting every 30 minutes like ILMT. IBM can either write you a separate exception or include it in your ELA. And you need to remember that this kind of exception is a big deal, so get it in writing, not just somebody verbally saying, sure, do whatever you want. You get a written exception and there's a form for it, or it could be included in your ELA, but you also have to uphold your part, your half of the agreement. So if we stick with the Flexera example, what if you don't end up buying Flexera or you don't finish deploying it and you receive an audit letter? Well, if you have Flexera partially deployed or ILMT even deployed, they're going to count that as subcapacity because they did grant you the exception, but anything else that wasn't covered, that you didn't get around to deploying either one of them, it's going to be full capacity. What if I can't run ILMT because I have a secure environment? Will that be a compliance issue? The answer is no, because you're still full capacity. But you can still use IBM software. You just need to license fee on the full capacity. Once you've made that decision to be full capacity, you can work within that parameter. I've seen it with P-series servers where you have all the LPARs. You can purposely stack up all your partitions running the same software together on the same server. So you reduce your hardware footprint and the license is needed. So if you had a power server with 64 cores and like 60 are active, if you put 42 core LPARs on it, that's 80 virtual cores, and you get to cap your licensing at the 60 virtual cores. Yeah, that's always a licensing bonus, is that you're always capping it with the physical capacity of the box. So you could plan for that. Okay, what's an RVU? That's okay. I mean, the simple answer is resource value unit, but RVUs aren't easy to explain because the resource is defined within each software product. It used to be just managed cores, but now it could be a whole bunch of things. And you also use a similar technique with the user value units too, because there's a separate tiered tables on some of them for like employees and external users. So RVUs can be complicated because it could be a different resource counted in different tables. So since I got this one in advance too, let's say I have NetCool Omnibus, because that confuses a lot of people, and I have ping probes, which are monitoring the environment, and that's tier 1. Omnibus. NetCool gets a little crazy. When your team gives you the list of the tier 1 probes, they're giving you the traps and the syslog messages too, because they're all tier 1. You go back to the definition of the resource, it's the number of devices monitored. So in this case, we have 2,810 devices monitored, and then you go back to the tiered table, and then you calculate how many RVUs. So 2810 devices only need 1,463 RVUs of licenses, because it's a progressive tier table. The more RVUs are good if you are covering a lot of devices, like with this, or managing a lot of cores, because the more you use, the cheaper it gets for each RVU because of the table. Do I need to license my disaster recovery servers? IBM has some very generalized rules and some very specific rules. The specific software rules will always take precedent over the general rules, but the IBM has defines it as a hot standby, which is high availability, always will need a license. Warm, probably not. That's their idle standby. And then cold, I don't think I've found one lately that needs a license. But you always want to look at the software, and even that changes with version too. Why does IBM keep changing their licensing? Change is a constant, so it's not as simple as pointing at IBM changing a software license term or a metric or a definition, because it could also be you. You could change your hardware. Full capacity was fine when we had our single processor servers, but we also have virtualization changing. Cloud just isn't software as a service anymore. You have your different flavors where it's defined by who's providing the maintenance, the middleware, the storage. So it gets more and more complex. But as we think ahead, things will always be changing. Even when you want to point at IBM making changes. Let's use Cognos as an example. IBM simplified their licensing and combined some to have lesser user classes. But that lower class, the information distribution users, they just receive reports. So that's the bottom of the pyramid. You got a lot of those. They changed that over to PVUs, but back in 2013 when they changed it, you might have said, oh, that's great. But over time, if you're still in the same mindset with the Cognos users, you could be deploying Cognos to more servers, and now you don't have enough PVUs. If you're not using ILT, then you got full capacity, and it's kind of snowballing out of control there as you get into Cognos problems based on a migration that happened a few years ago. Okay. Is there an easy set of steps to follow for audit compliance? Complying with software licensing rules should lead to good results with an audit. IBM software reviews give you time to gather data, and both their auditing firms and IBM act in a professional manner. And they can be tremendously helpful in giving instructions to gather the data, because IBM is complex. So it's not just run one script on all your servers and here's the answer. So in this webinar, we've already covered subcapacity, RVUs, maybe some disaster recovery. So with specific software asset management, not just running a tool, because you need a human element there with the understanding of the license rule. There should be a high degree of compliance. And there may still be frustration when an auditor doesn't understand what you present, and you may have to wait until the settlement phase to present the same documents to IBM. But if you have a general education on all the products you use, it should be fine.
Thanks, Sharon. I just want to add one last thing to that question. A great first step is to contact Miro. If you are unsure or you're concerned that you don't even know where to begin, we can help you get started and make life a lot easier.
Okay. Oh, there's a good follow-up question. Are there any success stories of firms mitigating exposure to IBM and compliance audits, and how did they achieve this? Yes, there are. What makes me happy is the strategies that utilize the licenses the client already has, or if there's a license shortfall, is there an alternative that suits their needs better? Clients mostly are happy with whatever costs least, but I sometimes have a case where the audit isn't their primary concern, but their future needs are. So IBM audits could have happened at a bad time for them as they moved from either on-premise to cloud, or maybe they were in a transition phase with even 2 IBM products, and we're not conscious of the time involved to sunset an IBM software product, or might have multiple copies of archives from no longer used products. Or the worst of it is if an IBM product creeps into their standard server image when it's not widely used. So it's similar to the early question about finding software you didn't expect with ILMT. Are you using it? If not, clean it up. That's different than installing IBM software, using it and gaining, if you install it, use it, gain a benefit without a license, and then deinstall it, that's, clearly in violation of, IBM's intention of their licenses. You're using their intellectual property. But in another case, let's say you have users on a Domino server and those people retired or left the company. You can fix that and improve your process to avoid overlooking that in the future. You just don't want this to be a one-time event. So you don't want to go into panic mode when an auditor asks you to take a screenshot of the number of users on the lower left there of your Domino directory and wonder, since when do we have 5,000 users? There's only 600 of us. That's not the time to wonder about your processes. Are they ever really fair in their judgment? I guess you mean they as IBM. The auditor's role, you have Deloitte or KPMG, is to report the facts. How many are owned, how many are deployed, and if it's enough licenses. That's their role. The auditor is applying the licensing rules, and they give you a chance to review their findings in case there could always be a misunderstanding. There's some complexity here. They didn't, if they just get raw data, there might be something that they need to know. And if it doesn't change the numbers, they usually make notes. So IBM understand there's an issue that you'll probably address with them when they're talking settlement. And IBM can be flexible when they discuss their proposed settlement. Like they'll say in their kickoff slide, they want to know about how their customers use their software. So an auditor has the ability to waive or concede a portion of a settlement if you can explain how you ended up where you are today. While you're in an audit, you probably won't feel it's enough, but the auditors keep it professional, and they also need to gain an approval to waive a portion. So that's why they need to hear what happened. They don't get an approval because they say, oh, it's just too much money. It doesn't hurt to ask or be repetitive. There's some shortfalls that just will never be excused. If you let's say you hit all of IBM's sore points with your explanation, you're an IBM partner. You download IBM software for developing your software. Someone likes it so much they install it for your internal use and start running it in production. It's found during an audit. IBM proposes you buy the necessary licenses to continue using it. And you're like, well, can you waive that because I'm going to move off this in another year. I want to keep using it, but I'll get off of it. And the reason you're using IBM's intellectual property for your own benefit, and it's, you want to continue using it without buying licenses, that's not going to be waived. That's, that's going to just rub them the wrong way. How to handle false positives from ILMT. That's a little different than discovering software you didn't expect. The tough part is you've already discovered it. So the hard part is done. You found it. Can you articulate what has been found and what you think the problem is for IBM support? You call them and see if they can offer to fix it. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but document things. Don't just make a single call and ignore the problem from that point forward. Exercise some responsibility. And in your ILMT report, you can add an exclusion or suppression and put a reason. If you add a reason, it helps track it back to the point of discovery, and IBM's auditor will see it too in the audit trail report from the ILMT. So if you undergo an audit, make it something that makes sense rather than ILMT is wrong. ILMT is wrong doesn't help anybody. How to strategically address IBM and partner negotiations long term. Well, if we're talking long term, would an ELA be out of the question? IBM ELAs can be customized and contain flexible terms, so even if you have trouble forecasting your usage or investing time and responsibilities you take on, it could be helpful. You might have to invest time with reporting if you get some flexible terms, like I mentioned earlier, where you deploy software from a catalog list in your ELA, and then you're supposed to report to IBM every 3 or 6 months how much new software you deployed, and then there'll be like a catalog associated price per item, so you can draw down from a prepaid amount and deploy from a whole list of things, and it'll fit your growth as you expand with certain products over other ones. And I'm running out of time. Okay, and at a high level, if you have a Passport Advantage focused audit, scanning workstations, looking for target applications, what are the standard misses? So with workstations, I'm thinking user licenses. It depends on what type of software we're talking about. Like Rational can be a little tricky because it has the floating or concurrent users. So you'd really need to, for that one, you need to look at the license key server to check that it's limiting usage to the number of licenses you currently have on support. And there's also Domino, which I mentioned earlier, where the licensing is not based on the number of workstations it's installed on, but the number of users in the Domino directory. And with Domino Enterprise Edition, you also need to look at those server PVUs, because it's a dual license product that you're licensing the users and the servers. So also with Domino, you can have users accessing your Domino applications through the web, and that's Domino Utility. You can't use your Domino Enterprises for that. And Cognos is a world of its own, so it's not a workstation equals a user. There's name changes, and there's all the roles they could have. And then you also have another miss could be name changes. You could have the old product name installed, and that could be, somebody just looking at a report might not link them together. So don't forget that there may be some workstation that have multiple versions on them. So only count that once. Because I've seen that with SPSS that used to be Clementine. But when I go back to the idea of misses, I think the best way to catch them would be to approach the problem from both directions. The first way would be, what do I own but I'm not finding with the scans? The first time, don't assume everyone stopped using it and properly deinstalled the software. Do more investigating to make sure you've cleaned it all up. And then the second way to approach it from the other direction is, what have I found but don't have a matching license? The severity of this might be based on who made the tool. Like Microsoft's SCCM finds IBM software, but it's not perfect on naming what it found. So you might have to do a little work to match it up to a license, and that's where more investigation happens.
All right, thanks, Sharon. And I just want to add to the question where the person asked about long-term strategic planning with IBM. Again, my advice would be call us, and we can help you both get the best possible terms and conditions, the best pricing, and optimize your environment with an eye toward the future. So if we didn't get to your questions, I know there's a few we weren't able to get to because of time, please contact us at miroconsulting.com. You can get us email at info@miroconsulting.com, and you can call us at 732-738-8511. This concludes the webinar, and again, please contact us with any additional questions. Thank you very much.